Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the public health issue of malnutrition in the country, the associated challenges, and the way forward. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the critical public safety issue of stampedes in the country and the measures needed to mitigate it. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2025 along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to nutrition, the foundation of development. Now, we all know that India is one of the largest producers of milk, of fruits, of vegetables around the world. But still we suffer from a very serious public health issue, and that is malnutrition. Now, what we need to understand is that malnutrition is basically a result of, it's a complex interplay of various factors. For example, the social factors, the economic factors, the cultural factors. Now, this affects the health status of the individual, and ultimately it affects the developmental trajectory of the nation. Now, in this particular article, which has been published in the Hindu, what the authors talk about is 2 strategies. What they say is that in order to eradicate this menace of malnutrition from the country, we need to adopt these 2 strategies. The very first strategy which they talk about is nutrition sensitive community planning, and the second strategy which they talk about is Nutri Pathshala. So we'll have a discussion that what these strategies are all about. So again, what we'll try to do today is we'll first see that what is malnutrition, what is the status of malnutrition around the world and in India, what are the consequences with respect to malnutrition, what are the associated challenges, and what can be the way forward. Believe me, this is going to be a very important discussion and a very comprehensive discussion, especially in the context of the topics GS1 Women and GS2 Health and Vulnerable sections. Now, let's first define what do we mean by malnutrition. Now, according to the definition given by the World Health Organization, WHO, malnutrition implies the deficiencies, the excesses or imbalances with respect to the intake of energy and nutrients in the human body. Now, this is but obvious that if there would be deficiency or excesses or imbalances with respect to the intake of these things, definitely it would affect the overall health status of the individual, and ultimately it would affect the economic potential of the nation as a whole. That is what you have to understand. Now, what are the different types of malnutrition? The very first can be undernutrition. For example, we have stunting. What is stunting? Stunting primarily refers to low height for age. This signifies chronic undernutrition. Then we can have, for example, wasting. Wasting primarily implies low weight for height. Now, this implies the acute malnutrition, right? This is what you have to understand. Next, we can have the micronutrient related malnutrition. See, first of all, what are micronutrients? Micronutrients can be, for example, we have the vitamins. For example, we can have minerals. So it primarily implies micronutrients. Whenever we have a deficiency with respect to these micronutrients, there can be the possibility of disease. Let's talk about the deficiency with respect to vitamin A. So there can be low vision or impaired vision. The deficiency with respect to vitamin B, there can be beriberi, or the deficiency with respect to the mineral iron, there can be anemia, or the deficiency with respect to the mineral iodine, there can be goiter. So these are the micronutrient related malnutrition. Then there can be the aspect of obesity. It primarily implies the overweight, and it basically signifies the sedentary lifestyle. So if an individual is having the body mass index between 25 and 30, that person is categorized into the overweight category. And if the individual is having the body mass index beyond 30, then that individual is basically classified in the category of obese. Next aspect is diet-related non-communicable disease. In the last 2-3 decades, what we have seen, especially after 1990s, there has been the increasing prevalences of deaths due to non-communicable disease. For example, the heart diseases, for example, the blood pressure, diabetes or strokes. So is the malnutrition also a reason for that? Yes. Because what happens is that if the body doesn't have the sufficient nutrition, then definitely the possibility or the body is more susceptible or more prone to these diseases. That is what you have to understand. Now, what is the status of malnutrition around the world? According to the Micronutrient Forum, almost over 3 billion people lack all-year access to nutrient-rich healthy diets. An estimated 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. Nearly 1 in 3 women of reproductive age suffer from anemia. there is iron deficiency. 1 in every 3 people is overweight or obese. Almost a quarter of all children under the age of 5 are short for their age or stunted. A tenth of the global population, around 80 crore people, almost 811 million people, are estimated to be undernourished. So this is a very important data you can definitely cite in the answers. Now, if I talk about the Indian scenario, the most important source of data is the National Family Health Survey. What you have to understand is that we had a National Family Health Survey of 2015-16, 4, and then we had a National Family Health Survey 5 of 2019-20. What this infographic shows us that hardly there has been an improvement, or whenever, even if there has been an improvement, it's been very small, right? So it says the nutritional status of children in India barely improved in 2019-20 from the levels in 2015-16. The National Family Health Survey shows. The data is in the percentage form. Let's go through this. The children aged 6 to 59 months who are anemic. So you see, it was 58.6%, and it basically went to 67.1%. So there has been an increase. Then look at children under the age of 5 who are stunted. It was 38.4% in 15-16. It went to 35.6%. Then children under the age of 5 who are wasted, it has come to 19.3. Hardly there has been an improvement from 21. Then children under the 5 years of age who are severely wasted, 7.7% from 7.5 increased. Then children under the 5 who are underweight, 32.1%. Children aged 6 to 23 months receiving an adequate diet, so it is 11.3%. Institutional births, 88.6%. Again, this data is very important, and you can basically cite these data points in your answers. Now, there's one important report which we often talk about, and that is the Global Hunger Index. Please tell me in the comment section that who publishes the Global Health Hunger Index, right? Now, what you have to understand is that this primarily showcases, it tells us the status of the nutritional aspect in the world, around the world, and in different countries, right? So it has some of the very important components. If you look at this particular infographic, this particular index considers some of the important parameters. Now, why I'm stressing upon this factors, there have been many questions in the UPSC, primarily in the prelims, where the question has emphasized upon the different components, who publishes the report, what is the weightage of different components, and what is India's ranking, right? Now, the very first, as I said, that the Global Hunger Index is a tool for comprehensively measuring and tracking the hunger at the global, regional, and national levels. GHI scores are based on the values of 4 component indicators. What are these 4 components? The very first is undernourishment. Now over here, undernourishment implies the share of the population with insufficient calorie intake. Then we have child stunting. Again, the same thing. The share of the children under the age of 5 who have low height for their age, reflecting chronic undernutrition. Then we have child wasting. The share of the children under the age of 5 who have low weight for their height, reflecting acute malnutrition. Then we have child mortality, that is the share of the children who die before their 5th birthday, partly reflecting the fatal mix of inadequate nutrition and unhealthy environments. Now, one thing which you have to understand is if you have a country which is near the 0, it shows good indicators of the overall health, right? Hunger. And if you have a particular country whose score is near the 100 mark, definitely it calls for the severe levels of hunger, right? Based on the values of the 4 indicators, the Global Hunger Index score is calculated on a 100-point scale, reflecting the severity of hunger, where 0 is the best possible score and 100 is the worst. Each country's GHI score is classified by severity from low to extremely alarming. Now, if you look at the levels in India, now this report has been time and again contested by the government of India, but again becomes very important from the perspective of examination. The India's number was 27.3, right? And again, in the 2024 Global Hunger Index, India ranked 105th out of 127 countries around the world, with sufficient data to calculate the 2024 Global Hunger Index scores. With a score of 27.3 in 2024, India has a level of hunger that is serious. So this is the category. So we have different categories, for example, low, moderate, serious, alarming, and extremely alarming. Now, with respect to different components, again, very important data source. 13.7% of the population is undernourished. 35.5% of the children under the 5 are stunted. 18.7% of the children under the 5 are wasted, and 2.9% of the children die before their 5th birthday, right? So this is what you have to understand. The data points, again, very important. Let's talk about what are the consequences because of malnutrition. The very first is health implication. See, if you have a person who is suffering from the nutrient deficiency, definitely that person would have stunted growth, and ultimately it would imply an effect on the overall physical and cognitive development of that individual. Next aspect is weakened immune system. Whenever there would be less intake of these vitamins and nutrients, the immune system would not be robust and the person would be more prone to different diseases, right? Next, different infections. For example, the communicable, because of we have different bacteria, viruses, fungi, right? Micronutrient deficiencies are also responsible for NCDs, which I already told you. So we have the rising burden of NCDs. So almost more than 2/3 of the deaths which are taking place in the country are primarily because of the NCDs. And one of the most important factors is micronutrient deficiency. Next, we have educational consequences. See, whenever you have the less intake of these micronutrients, it definitely affects the cognitive development of the individual. Now, when we talk about the children, if it is affecting their cognitive development, what would happen is that they would not be in a position to absorb the knowledge, right? And again, the learning outcomes would be affected, as also highlighted by the report known as USSR report. So the USSR report has highlighted this, that especially in the rural areas, the learning outcomes are low. And one of the prime reasons is the malnutrition, right? Increased dropouts. Why? See, just imagine a situation that if you have a particular child from a low economic family, then what would happen? Because of the malnutrition, the child is not consuming the enough of the nutrients and vitamins. It would affect his cognitive development, and ultimately what would happen is he would not perform better. Now, the child is already poor, the family is poor. The decision which they would take is, let's drop out this child from the school. So this increases the dropout rates. That is what you have to understand. Next aspect is that of the economic impact. So as I told you in the beginning, what happens is if there is less intake of these nutrients or vitamins, it would definitely affect the person. It would make the person more prone to different diseases, and it would affect the productivity of that individual. Because if the person would be more prone to disease, he or she would fall ill, and that would compromise on his outcomes, the economic outcomes. Increase healthcare costs. The person would suffer from increased out-of-pocket expenditure. That is what you have to understand. Intergenerational impact. See, what we have seen is that in India, as I gave you the number, in India, more than 50% of the women between the age of 15 and 49, they are anemic. Almost the number is 57%. Now, again, understand, if you have the mother who is anemic and during her pregnancy, if she doesn't consume enough of these nutrients, definitely the child who would be born, he or she would also suffer from those nutritional deficiency. So this basically creates a perpetual cycle of these deficiencies and affects the whole generation. That is what you have to understand. Cycle of nutritional deficiencies, long-term health effects. Long-term health effects in the form of when that particular child would become an adult. Definitely there would be some aspects on the health of that particular individual. For example, in the form of the non-communicable disease, maybe blood pressure, maybe diabetes, because that person didn't consume enough of these nutrients when he was in the womb or when the child was in the infant stage. Next aspect is social consequences. What we see is that the section of the society which is most affected because of the malnutrition is the low economic section, the poor section of the society, right? And again, what happens? Why? Because they do not have the adequate economic outcome. They do not have the adequate economic potential to go for a good, healthy diet, right? So this definitely increases the vulnerability of this particular section, what we call as the marginalized section, right? Be the poor or be it the SCs or STs or the other sections of the society. Again, what you have to understand is that it deepens the social inequalities. Because we already have a section which is marginalized, that is not having the proper access to the nutrients, affecting the health outcomes and ultimately their economic potential. So ultimately it would deepen the divisions in the society. Next aspect is also of stigma and discrimination. Whenever you see a child who is stunting or wasting, many a times what happens is in the school or in the other areas, the child is subjected to discrimination or there's a stigma which is attached. So this not only affects his physical well-being, but also his mental well-being. So the confidence goes down, right? Next is the aspects of national development. See, if a major chunk of the population, if the major section of the society is suffering from that aspect of malnutrition, it would definitely affect the national development because it would reduce the human capital. There would be more diversion of resources towards the health related aspect, right? And people would spend more upon these illnesses. So this would definitely affect the overall outcome, reduce human capital. The socio-economic progress of the nation would be hampered, it would be hindered, right? Healthcare burden would increase. Again, as I said, diversion of resource. See, please understand, we have limited resources. Now, if the major chunk of the resource goes into this aspect of health, let's say if a person is suffering from any illness, if he's or she is spending a lot of money in the overall health aspect, definitely that person won't be able to spend in the other areas, other productive areas. Same thing goes for the nation, because nation has competing priorities. Nation has to invest in the agriculture. And right now we are witnessing that we also need to have a robust defense aspect. So we also need to invest in the defense aspect. But if the healthcare aspects, if the health status would be low, definitely we'll have to divert a lot of resources into this aspect. So these are all the consequences. Also, what you have to understand is there's a particular concept given by the World Health Organization which talks about the disability adjusted life years. Now, what it speaks about the disease burden. It is primarily a result of two factors. First is years lived with disability. Let's say you have a particular person, and in these spans of life, the person has suffered from a particular disability. That is one thing. Second, the years of life lost because of premature mortality. Let's say the expected life years of that person was this, and the person died prematurely because of any disease. Let's say a non-communicable disease, where the reason can definitely be the micronutrient deficiency. So the summation of the years of life lost because of the disability and the years of life lost, the overall, that is what we call as a disease burden in the form of disability adjusted life years. Just a concept. Now, what are the challenges with respect to the malnutrition handling in the country? So as I told you, malnutrition affects different domains of a particular human's life, right? The very first is, let's talk about the widespread inequality. See, what we are talking about is that the major section of the society in the country has low economic capacity. It belongs to that low income category. And ultimately this particular section doesn't have enough resources to spend upon the good diets, the balanced and diversified diets, right? So ultimately it results into having low nutritional levels, and ultimately the disease prevalence is more, right? So there are affordability issues. Major chunk of the population, major section of the society is unable to afford a good healthy diet. That is what you have to understand. Also, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, almost 55.6% of the population in the country cannot afford a good healthy diet. That is what you have to understand. And there has been the issue with respect to the rising costs also. So according to the same data given by the Food and Agriculture Organization, what it says is that in the year 2017 till the year 2022, there has been a rising cost with respect to the nutritional diet. For example, in the year 2017, on purchasing power parity, for a particular day, the nutritional diet, the cost was $2.86 US, and it increased to $3.36 US. In the terms of rupees, it basically increased from almost 240 rupees to 290 rupees. So there has been a rising cost with respect to these well-diversified diet, right? Next aspect can also be because of the food insecurity. See, again, when we are talking about the food insecurity, it can be because of different reasons. Let's say a particular area in the country, a particular zone has been struck with a particular disaster, maybe a tsunami, maybe drought, maybe some other flood related aspects. So definitely it affects the provision of food supplies to this particular section of the society, right? So definitely it has an effect upon that. Then we can have conflicts, the socio-economic conflicts. It also has an effect on the supplies. Then price fluctuations. We have been seeing this news that, in the events of crisis, there can be a tremendous impact upon the prices of the various commodities. So that is one of the reasons. And if the prices would rise, a major chunk of the population wouldn't be able to basically have the affordability aspect, right? It won't be able to buy or purchase those items. Next aspect is climate change. Now, in this very article, the authors have tried to talk about the ill effects of climate change. What they are saying is that because of the ill effects of the climate change, what we call as the anthropogenic climate change, there has been the reduced yields. The yields have reduced. Also, annually, there is a loss to the global food systems to the tune of $12 trillion because of the failures in the food systems, in the form of the environmental degradation, in the form of these food insecurity issues. So this is the overall loss. Next aspect is inadequate dietary intake and dietary shifts. What we have observed primarily since 1990s, that the disposable incomes of people have increased. With this disposable incomes, their dietary patterns have also shifted. Previously, they used to be more dependent upon a well-diversified and balanced diet, including millets. Now they are switching more towards the processed and sugar-laden alternatives, the packaged foods. And because of this, what happens is there is the rise in the high sugar and salt content. And this is also one of the reasons for the rise in the non-communicable disease. The dependence of the people has increased upon the cereals and not on millets. So this overall also implies the nutritional deficiency, because millets are something which have a great nutritional potential, right? But the overall intake of the millets has reduced. Then there are aspects of poor sanitation. For example, we have the inadequate water sanitation and hygiene. What happens? See, whenever we have the inadequate water sanitation and hygiene, it increases the risk of pathogens, the bacteria, the viruses. And again, what happens? That it increases the communicable disease. And that affects especially the lower strata of the society more. And there is increased disease burden and overall increased cost with respect to the health. Right? So again, this also affects the absorption and utilization of nutrients. This is but obvious. Let's say you have a particular person who has suffered from a particular disease, maybe a communicable or non-communicable disease. The body would not be in a position to absorb these nutrients, even when the person is consuming that, right? So this is the overall aspect, the overall effect. Also, we have the National Family Health Survey 5, which says that only 69% of the population has the proper access to the water, sanitation and hygiene. The rest, 31% doesn't have that particular access. Next, we have lack of primary health infrastructure. Please understand, having a robust primary healthcare setup is very important, so that can provide the different services with respect to the immunization, with respect to the advices upon what a balanced diet is all about, what a healthy diet is all about, what can be the different alternatives. So those advices are primarily given by these primary health centers. But even when we have these primary health centers, first of all, the numbers are very low. And whenever we have these the primary health centers, the kind of services which they are providing is suboptimal. It is not up to the mark, right? So again, the services with respect to the immunization or antenatal care, they are not being provided in an effective manner. And this obviously risks the increase of the diseases. Now, according to the World Health Organization, there has to be almost 1 doctor per 1,000 population. And there has to be 3 nurses for 1,000 population. But in India, the situation is having 0.73 doctors per 1,000 population and 1.74 nurses per 1,000 population. Obviously, we don't have the adequate healthcare professionals, the paramedic staff, the nursing staff. Next, when we talk about the delayed and inconsistent delivery, there have been issues with respect to the program implementation. See, understand, most of the health related aspects, or when we talk about eradicating this malnutrition aspect, most of the schemes are centrally sponsored schemes, where you have the participation from the center as well as the states. Now, there has been, what it has been seen is that there is a delay with respect to the disbursal of funds from the center to the states or from the states to the districts. So obviously, it affects the overall returns of these programs, fund delays, and therefore, these nutritional interventions, they are not working efficiently. So they are not able to give the proper outcome which they were supposedly, were thought to give, right? Next, we have a particular data with respect to the National Family Health Survey 5, which says that only 50.3% of the children are able to access services which are being provided in the Anganwadis. For example, the preschool education or immunization or the health checkups. Just understand, only 50% are able to access. Rest 50% are unable to access. So this is a very grave concern. Inadequate monitoring and evaluation. See, you have to understand that I have been talking since the beginning that we primarily rely on the data given by the surveys. For example, the National Family Health Survey. It's a survey. What you have to understand is that the policy making right now is based on surveys. Surveys do not give us the adequate or the correct picture. So there's a need for robust data. Right? And right now we have these issues. We do not have the adequate data with us, the robust data on the basis of which we can have proper policy. There are issues with respect to the assessment. And then because of that, ultimately, the policy making also gets affected. So as you can see, there are different benefits of millets: gluten-free, good for celiac disease, boosts immunity, easy to digest, supports high development, and rich in antioxidants. Now, what should be the way forward to fight the malnutrition? Now, before that, let's talk about the initiatives by the government of India in order to eradicate the malnutrition aspect. The very first is Mission Poshan 2.0. Before that, let's talk about PM Poshan. Now, PM Poshan is a particular scheme which is a revamped version of midday meal, which primarily emphasizes upon providing the provision of the nutritional diet to the students from class 1 to 8 in the government or government aided schools. On the other hand, we have another scheme which is Poshan Abhiyan. This is primarily an initiative of Ministry of Women and Child Development, which focuses upon the pregnant and lactating mothers and the children from the age of 0 to 6 years of age, right? The infants. Now, the overall objective is to enhance, to basically focus upon the immunization aspect, to focus upon the health checkups, to focus upon the preschool education. Now, what the government did was, it basically came up with Mission Poshan 2.0, a very all-encompassing scheme, which also subsumes the Poshan Abhiyan and some other components with respect to the malnutrition aspect. Then we have ICDS, Integrated Child Development Scheme. Again, very important scheme. The provision is through the help of Anganwadis. The very objective is to focus upon the pregnant and lactating mothers and to make sure that, and also the children from the age of 0 to 6 years of age, and to make sure that the children have access to proper immunization or health checkups. Next, we have rice fortification. It primarily implies artificial fortification of rice, so as to increase the different components, the nutrients. For example, we have iron or we have B12, vitamin B12, right? Then we have Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana. The very objective, it's basically a conditional cash transfer scheme for the pregnant and lactating mothers. Scheme for adolescent girls. As I told you, because of malnutrition, what happens is there is the increased dropout. In order to control, in order to stem down that dropout rates, we have this particular scheme for adolescent girls. Then we have Mother's Absolute Affection in order to increase the breastfeeding. Then we have Poshan Vatikas. These are basically the Nutri Gardens, which focus upon growing these fruits and vegetables and the local fruits and vegetables, so that children can have access to these resources and definitely the overall nutrition level goes up. Now, what should be the way forward? The very first is enhanced fortification. Fortification is one of the most effective and least cost method. That is what you have to understand. And especially in a country like India, when we have less resources, this is one of the very economically viable method. So this is very important. Now, fortification, in this article also, the authors talk about the biofortification. So you can have the artificial fortification in the form of addition of these minerals or nutrients in the food component, or you can have the biofortification, primarily with the help of genetic modification or plant breeding. That is what you have to understand, right? So it is very important for the large scale implementation and a very useful policy. Also, we have the national program for the iodine deficiency disorder control program, which proved very effective primarily on the basis of this fortification aspect. Then we have focus socio-behavioral campaigns. The very objective is to increase. See, we had this Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, right? Now, in the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the very objective was to basically nudge the behavior of the people, to make people to change their behaviors. Similarly, in order to enhance the nutritional aspect, we'll have to bring a change in the behavior. We'll have to shift to different diets, right? A well-balanced and diversified diet. That is what is needed, right? For example, the diverse diets or incorporation of millets, etc. Information, education, and communication campaigns are a must. We have to increase, we have to spread the word that this is very important, because of the non-intake or less intake of these nutrition, there is also an effect upon the overall health parameters. The NCDs, the non-communicable diseases, are increasing. Also, the editorial talks about the nutrition sensitive community planning. Now, this is what I want to specify. See, according to the authors, what is nutrition sensitive community planning? What they say is that the local community is primarily responsible for enhancing the nutritional outcomes. How they can do so? Primarily with the help of three important factors. The very first is focus on having a robust soil and water conservation. So we also need to incorporate a proper soil and water conservation. Next aspect which they emphasize is upon the water, sanitation and hygiene. Having a robust structure for water, sanitation and hygiene. The third aspect which they try to emphasize is having a proper healthcare delivery system at the grassroots level. The grassroots delivery of health services. So again, what they're saying is that if we want to eradicate this menace of malnutrition, we need to go with nutrition sensitive community planning, where the local community should emphasize upon integrating these three factors. The very first factor is having a robust plan for soil and water conservation. which also includes the aspect of mitigating the ill effects of climate change. Second is having a proper structure for water, sanitation, and hygiene. And the third is having a robust grassroots delivery of health services, especially what we talk about the health and wellness centers, the primary health centers. So this is what the nutrition sensitive community planning is all about. Believe me, these are the keywords which become very important once you write a mains answer. So you can incorporate these things. Next aspect, which the other point is enhance the infrastructure. See, we need to enhance the infrastructure, as I already told you, especially the grassroots delivery of health services. So we have the local delivery solutions. We need to have local delivery solutions in the form of the health and wellness centers, the primary health centers, the sub centers, right? Nutritional staff must be trained. See, again, these staff working at these PHCs, they must be well trained so that they're well equipped to give the advices with respect to what should be the nutritional intake of these pregnant and lactating mothers or these children. Very important. Also, we need to increase the overall expenditure, the public expenditure on the health, as what the national health policy also say, from 1.2% to 2.5% of the GDP, right? Also, as I said, that the focus has to be upon the public delivery system, right? We need to focus upon the delivery of these proper foods, including millets in the various diets. Also, we need to have a robust implementation of the midday meal, what we call as the PM Poshan scheme. Next, monitoring and evaluation, as I told you, we have the source is the data and the surveys which we carry out, and surveys do not give us the correct picture. We need to have a real-time tracking monitoring system. For example, we have the Poshan tracker, which gives us the real-time values with respect to the malnutrition in the country. So we need to expand it further. Assessment so that we can have adequate nutritional interventions. Consumption of locally nutritious food. Very important. We need to have this transition. We have slowly shifted to different diets, the Chinese or the American diets. We need to basically shift from those diets to local cuisines. As we say, Poshan Vatikas, having these nutri gardens where we can grow the local fruits and vegetables, and then that would increase the overall nutritional value in the children. Then we have this aspect of Nutri Pathshala, which primarily focuses upon three areas. The first is social development. The second is agriculture. We need to focus upon the agriculture. And the third is education, right? So there has to be a proper integration of these three aspects, the social development, the agriculture, and the education. And then we can come up with this product of Nutri Pathshalas. So this is what the authors are talking about. Then we need to also focus upon the other aspects of communication strategies. Very, very important. What we are trying to say is that people need to be made aware. As I said, that this has to be a behavioral campaign. People need to be made aware with respect to the consequences of malnutrition, right? And how we can, through various simple means, we can enhance the nutrition level of the children in particular. Community radio, door-to-door outreach, and then vernacular languages. Also, in the editorial, there has been a particular focus upon having a proper information with respect to the ingredients. For that, we need to focus upon having those products, those packages, which have proper QR codes. There has to be a robust food labeling. So again, see, what we are trying to say is that even though we are one of the largest producers of these commodities, milk, fruits, vegetables, we are having this menace, this issue of malnutrition, which is obviously not good for the country because it is affecting the overall potential, the economic potential of the country. So we need to incorporate these strategies. Definitely, the nutrition levels have increased, but it has to be more balanced. We need to incorporate a diet which is more balanced, which is more diversified. And again, this won't just solve the malnutrition related aspect, but it would also lower down the deaths because of the non-communicable disease. So this is what we have to incorporate. Let's have a mains practice question. Malnutrition in India is a multidimensional challenge that goes beyond food insecurity to include the socio-cultural, economic, and lifestyle factors. Discuss the major causes of malnutrition in India and critically evaluate the effectiveness of the government initiatives in addressing the particular issue. Suggest a holistic approach to tackle the malnutrition across all sections of the society. Also, we have a previous year question. It says, poverty and malnutrition create a vicious cycle, adversely affecting the human capital formation. What steps can be taken to break the cycle? So you can see we have this aspect of interdisciplinary nature where different topics are being integrated, and then the examiner is trying to assess your understanding with respect to these areas. So again, please do write an answer on these questions. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, please do not forget to press the like button and do mention in the comment section. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to crushed by the crowd stampedes in India. In a particular temple in Goa, more than 1 lakh devotees gathered, and then there was a breakage of a rope barricade, which ultimately led to a stampede situation, which has killed more than 6 people and many are injured. Now, what you have to understand is that these incidents, the stampede incidents, it's a very serious public safety issue, and it has been recurring in the country. For example, in the year 2011, we had a particular stampede incident in Sabrimala, where more than 106 people died. Then in 2014, we had a particular political rally in Patna, in the Gandhi Maidan, where more than 30 people died. Also, according to the data given by the National Crime Records Bureau, NCRB, it says from the year 1996 till 2022, more than 4,000 incidents of stampedes have been reported. And in these incidents, the reported deaths have been to the tune of 3,000. So this is, again, as I said, it's a very serious public safety issue. So we'll look at this particular topic from that aspect of GS3, disaster management. Now, what is stampede? See, stampede primarily talks about, or it implies, the disorderly movement of people, right? When people disorderly move, and again, in different directions, and ultimately leads to a situation where people get trampled, right? So it talks about the disruption of the orderly movement of the crowds, leading to the injuries and fatalities. Now, this is a response to different factors. For example, a perceived danger. Let's say people are having the danger that their life may be at stake, or loss of physical space. Many of the incidents which have taken place with respect to the stampedes have taken in those areas where there were narrow passages, right? There were narrow ramps. So obviously there is less space and the chances of stampedes are more. Or a will to attain something. What is this? Many times what we have seen is that there are religious preachers. Once they go, there is a will among the people to basically touch their feet. And again, they gather with that pace. And ultimately, sometimes these stampedes take place and then they are crushed. So again, also we have, according to the National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA, it basically describes the process of stampede, how the stampede takes place. What are the causes which NDMA talks about? It says that there can be structural failures. That is, the place where the event is being organized, there can be failures with respect to the structures of that particular place, or there can be the human errors, or there can be a natural calamity, let's say earthquake or any other calamity, or let's say a flood. Then the other factors which the NDMA talks about is the attendance level. If the number of people is too much, definitely the consequences would be higher. Action by the performer. So let's say you have a particular entity who is doing something, let's say a religious preacher. Now, as a reaction, you have the people. And ultimately, as a reaction, what happens is there can be a stampede-like situation. Improper or inadequate arrangement. Because of all these factors, what happens is there is a panic which is created among the people, what we call as the craze or the excitement. And ultimately, it leads to the evacuation, crowding. People start to crowding, right? And this is because on the basis of the excitement which people have. Now, the other thing which NDMA talks about is fist, the kind of circumstances which are created. What is fist? The very first is force. When there is crowding, people try to force upon each other. There is the continuous, force on people, by the people, and therefore it increases the overall environment, the pressure in the environment. Then there can be the issue with respect to the information. There can be a possible rumor, and that basically is the stampedes can be aggravated because of that, because of the rumors. Next, space, as I told you. What happens if you have the space which is less? Definitely the chances of stampedes are more. If you have a wide playground and an area which is quite big enough, definitely the chances would be lower. Then the time, this is also very important. That the incident or the duration for which that particular incident takes place, that also matters. If the duration is higher, obviously, the casualties would be more, right? If the duration is lesser, the casualties would be less. Because of all these factors, the crowding then converts into the overcrowding. Now, what happens after overcrowding is, as soon as you have these vulnerable people, the women or the children, they get trampled, right? What happens is that they fall down, and ultimately there is the crush disasters. People start walking over them. What the NDMA calls as the compressive asphyxia. That is, you have less oxygen which is there, and because of the asphyxia, ultimately the people die. Or it can be because, as I said, the suffocation. They do not get the proper air, so they cannot breathe properly, and ultimately they succumb. The other reason can be high desired velocity, right? Let's say there is a group of people, too many people standing, and suddenly there's a burst of people. People start pushing on each other, and they start walking. In that particular situation, what happens? There is the incident of trample disaster. People basically, those who fall, the other people walk over them. So the vital organs, maybe the heart or the brain, it gets compressed, and ultimately the people die, succumb. So this is what we can say is it's a purely human-made tragedy, right? So ultimately we have to go into the reasons also, and we'll talk about that. If I talk about the for example the incidents which have taken place, you can just have a look in Allahabad, for example, in the year 1954, almost 800 people were killed. Then in Naina Devi Temple in Himachal, almost 146 people were killed in the year 2008. In Haridwar in the year 1986, almost 50 people were killed. Then the same situation is of Patna, Kolkata, Rajamundry. We have Sabrimala, as I just gave you the data with respect to Sabrimala in the beginning. Then we have Satara, almost 340 people died in the year 2005. Then we have Jodhpur, almost 224 people were killed. So these incidents have been recurring. Primarily, the reason what you have to understand, there are two. What are the two reasons? First, it is the negligence. Negligence of those persons who are basically organizing the event organizers, right? Or let's say you can have the political leaders who are organizing the political rally. Second, what you have to understand is the incapacity of the administration, or there's less deployment of the personnel, or let's say the police. So because of the less deployment, there's a setup which is unable to manage the particular situation. So first is the negligence aspect, second is the incapacity, right? Now, what are the major causes of stampedes in the country? First, as I told you, the structural causes. There can be a particular area, let's say, for example, you must have heard that there was, many a times what has happened is in movie halls, or let's say the places where the event takes place. Let's say there's a particular event with respect to the music, right? And suddenly there's a collapse. Recently we heard in Dominican Republic, the whole roofs and the whole structures collapsed, led to the killing of more than 200 people. So that can be a possible reason, right? The structure where the event is taking place, it collapses. Improper and unauthorized built structures. Most of these events which take place, be it a religious event or be it a political rally, they do not follow the proper protocols. The structures are not made in a proper robust manner. So ultimately they are fragile structures. And when you have pressure of the people, definitely they collapse, right? Difficult terrain, yes. We have seen one point which is very important to note here is almost 80% of the stampede incidents which have taken place in the country till now, they have been of religious nature. Right? They have taken place at those places where, let's say, there was a gathering with respect to devotees. In the same case, we are reading this article. Or let's say a religious preacher was saying something and people gathered over there. So it is primarily the religious in origin. Now, most of the temples, such temples, they are situated on hilltops. So the terrain is very difficult and the terrain is very narrow. The passage is very narrow. So once you have, a burst of people, definitely the chances of stampedes increase, and therefore ultimately we have more casualties. Narrow streets and absence of emergency exits. There is just one or two exits. We do not have multiple exits. So ultimately the people, in a rush to move to those exits, ultimately what happened? That they succumb. Fire and electricity causes. Let's say we have a temporary environment, a temporary setup, right? And a fire, evolves there. So ultimately you'll have people, there would be a chaos situation, right? And people would rush in different directions, and ultimately it can lead to the stampede-like situation. Non-availability of fire extinguishers, building and fire code violations. You know that we have the National Building Code, which is basically mandatory for all the buildings. But this has not been followed. Even for the commercial establishment like the movie halls, the cinema theaters, or the malls. And therefore, many incidents have taken place. Also, we have the fire safety regulations by the different state departments. Those are not being followed. Illegal electric connections and faulty electric equipments. Let's say there's a situation of the sudden short circuit, right? So that can create panic among people, and ultimately the people would rush in different directions. That can lead to stampede. Or let's imagine a situation where you have a lot of people, right, standing close to each other, and all of a sudden there is a power out. So it can create panic among the people, and people can rush in different directions, and this can also lead to stampede. Then we have crowd behavior, that is the craze. See, this is very important to note. As I told you that most of the incidents of stampede, they are of religious in nature. Primarily at those temples, or let's say a particular preacher is giving an advice about life or something. What we have seen, you must have heard about a tragedy which took place in Hathras, where the reported number of deaths is around 121. The primary reason was found, when you had this particular person, the religious preacher, when he was walking, there was an urge in the people to touch his feet, right? And when he walked away, people gathered to take that particular soil on which that person walked away. So that was a primary reason for these stampedes in the country, right? the craze, the panic among the people, crowds forcing on the entrance or exits. When you have limited exits, definitely the crowd would force upon each other, anxious and competitive crowd. People just want to get out, right? So and in this particular process, what happens? The vulnerable sections, the women, the children, their life is compromised. Then there can be the security issues. You must have heard about a particular incident which happened in Hyderabad in Sandhya Theatre. So you had the very famous actor Allu Arjun coming on a surprise, and there was an excitement among the people, and it led to the stampede, and ultimately you had a particular woman who died. So again, what we have to understand, it was primarily because of the under deployment of the personnel. Adequate personnel were not there, police personnel were not there. Those who were in charge of the event, those who were the event organizers, they did not have the proper number of people, and this happens in almost all of the cases of stampedes. Lack of adequate scientific planning. Before the event takes place, there is no proper planning that if a situation evolves to that level, what is going to be our response? So they do not think about that. Lack of adequate surveillance, be it through video monitoring systems, be it through the CCTV cameras. So there is no surveillance which is there. Lack of coordination between different stakeholders. See, please understand, there are multiple stakeholders when we talk about these events. Let's say we have for a particular event which is taking place, a music event or a political rally. There would be the event organizers, there would be the police personals, there would be these administration, there would be the fire department, there would be the medical hospitals, right? So there are multiple stakeholders. But the issue is there is absolute no coordination among these entities. That is what you have to understand. There are coordination gap between these agencies, inadequate water and medical assistance. So let's say if a particular event happens, a stampede incident happens, is there a provision of proper water or other medical aid? That is not. So you have this particular golden hour, right? People can definitely be saved. But ultimately what happens, because of the non-provision of these essential supplies, ultimately the people die. Communication delays. So there is no proper communication among different stakeholders. That is one of the very serious issues. Now, what are the impacts of these stampedes? The very first is trauma and loss. See, the way in which people die in these stampedes, it's very disheartening, it's very sad. Because people die because of trampling, because of suffocation, because of asphyxiation, right? Asphyxia, what we call, lack of oxygen. And again, the second point which you have to understand is most of the people who die in these disasters, stampedes incident, it's the women and the children. Right. So this causes a burden. This causes sort of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, on the relatives of those who die, right? Result in deaths and injuries. For example, in the incident of Hathras, almost 121 people died, and most of them were women and children. Next, we have economic hardships. See, what we're trying to say is that majority of the victims of these stampedes belong to the low economic section. You will say why? As I told you that in most of the incident of these stampedes across the country, they are of religious origin. Either they are somewhere in a temple, or in most of the cases, maybe there can be a religious preacher. What happens? Most of the participants of these events, they belong to the low economic sections of the society. Once the stampede takes place, and let's say you have the breadwinner of the family who dies, it leads to the economic burden on the family. In addition to the emotional burden, the economic burden, and it can lead to the poverty. That is what you have to understand. Erosion of trust. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the administration, of the police personnel, of the event organizers to see that no untoward incident takes place. And if an incident is going to take place, proper help, medical supplies should be there, provisioning of services should be there. But once all these things are absent, it leads to the distrust in the overall governance process. Loss of social and human capital. Because as I said to you, that most of the people who are dying in these stampedes incident, they either are women or are children. Once children die, definitely what we are seeing is it is a loss to the overall nation. It is a loss to the overall economic potential of the nation. So that is what you have to understand, social and human capital. Considering all these things, we have the National Disaster Management Authority, which came up with different guidelines. For example, a guide for state governments, local authorities, administrators, and organizers with respect to managing the crowds at events and venues of mass gathering. So these are the guidelines which are to be followed with respect to these event organizers. Now, what should be the way forward? Legislation, rules, and regulations for stampedes. Supreme Court in the Upahar cinema case very categorically said that there has to be a proper legislation, a robust legislation with respect to curbing these stampedes. Right? So we need to fix the accountability. We need to have a proper management framework that how the event is going to take place. What is going to be the protocol? how we would make sure that all these structural arrangements are made robust, right? And there has to be a proper liability with respect to those who are organizing the event, be it a religious event or be it a political rally. Next, specialization and professionalism. There have to be a proper training. The police personnel or the administration needs to be given a proper training with respect to how to control or manage such a situation. So there has to be an effective communication. There has to be the specialized personal training, be it the police or the administration or the healthcare setup, right? Again, there has to be the safety insurance, both for the event organizers as well as those who are participating in the event. Use of technology, very important. If we have a proper technology setup, we can make sure that yes, we can assume or we can basically have a preempt idea that, maybe a situation of stampede can arise. So on the basis of different technological interventions, for example, the CCTV cameras, surveillance, or the video monitoring systems, or the mobile control rooms, drones, face recognition, these should be incorporated whenever you have such meetings or such events taking place. Capacity evaluation. Before the event takes place, we need to evaluate whether the structure would be able to bear the burden or not, whether it is proper, it is robust or not, it is in a condition to handle the crowd or not. That is very important, of the location of the structure before holding these mass gatherings. Crowd behavior management. There have to be a proper structure. People need to be told that there should not be any miscommunication. We need to stop the rumors, because ultimately, as I told you in the beginning, one of the reasons for these stampedes is rumors. People spread rumors and ultimately you have these stampedes taking place and then people die. We have to come up with those strategies which focus upon calming the crowds. Systematic exits need to be there. So we need to have different exits, not just one single exit, but different exits. Penalties, very important. If such an incident takes place, if any untoward incident takes place, we need to make sure that there are strict penalties for those people who were involved in this particular incident. Revocation of the license of those who are organizing the event. Random checks and inspections need to be there by the state government, by the different personnel. Learning from the global best practices. See, we have huge events which take place around the world. For example, we have the Hajj pilgrimage in Makkah. They have a very sound, effective crowd management practice. So some of the elements can be incorporated in Indian aspects also. And again, there has to be technology integration. See, what we are trying to say is this is a particular scenario which is totally, humans are to be blamed for that, because this is not something which is a natural scenario. And the kind of deaths which people have, it's really very sad. It's disheartening. So we need to evolve with those strategies. We need to follow these things in order to make sure that the kind of events we are organizing, be it the political rally or the religious events, they need to be done in a proper manner. There have to be proper systematic exits. There have to be, the incorporation of technology, the drones, the CCTV cameras, or the other video monitoring systems, in order to make sure that any of these events, any of these incidents don't happen, because this is a very grave public safety issue. Let's have a mains practice question. Stampedes in India have frequently led to significant loss of life, particularly during the religious, cultural, and public gatherings. Analyze the key reasons for recurring crowd management failures in India. Suggest measures to enhance the crowd management systems to mitigate such disasters in the future. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question. Let's go to the simplified section. Coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic which talks about protecting the workers from heat. Let's look at the gist of the article. See, we all are witnessing the ill effects of climate change. And the most important reason for this is the increase in the global greenhouse gases, which has increased the average temperatures around the world. Now, when we specifically talk about the urban settlements, what we observe is that the average temperatures in the urban areas, it is somewhat higher than that when compared to the adjoining surroundings, adjoining areas in the form of the rural habitation. What we call this phenomena as the urban heat islands effect, right? We also discussed in one of the Analyst. Now, the other aspect is that we have a major chunk of the vulnerable sections of the society in the form of the laborers, the construction workers, or the vendors who are engaged in small enterprises in the open areas, and they are susceptible to these rise in the temperatures, right? So maybe their health can be compromised, and ultimately it would affect their overall economic returns. So what the authors in this particular article are talking about is that because of the increasing instances of heat waves in the country, the NDMA came up with the heat action plans. Different cities came up with the heat action plans. NDMA basically guided them. But those heat action plans, they're just on paper. Properly, they're not being implemented. That's the first aspect. Second aspect, what they're saying is that these vulnerable sections, these vendors, these construction workers or the laborers, they should be at the center stage of all these heat action plans. But that is not the case. We are not giving due importance to this particular section. Then the authors try to give the kind of way forward which is needed. So again, it's a very simple article, but very informative, and we'll go through this, and we'll also look at the value addition aspects. So what the article says is, in the very first week of April 25, Delhi crossed a dangerous threshold. The temperature soared above 41 degrees Celsius, and nights offered little relief. These extreme conditions are no longer outliers, but a part of the new deadly normal. Previously, we used to have, sometimes this condition where the temperatures are increasing for a short duration of time. But now this has become the norm, right? The temperatures are, soaring too high. There is this condition of the heat waves, and this has become the normal, right? The normal scenario. With climate change intensifying year after year, Indian cities have become the epicenter of growing crisis. Primarily, you can relate this aspect to the urban heat islands effect, right? Next aspect what the authors talk about is heat waves affect everyone. It is the India's millions urban informal workers. That is the vulnerable section where the authors are trying to focus, who are bearing the brunt of this slow-moving disaster. The Reserve Bank of India, very important data, can be used in the mains, has pointed out in the year 2024 that extreme heat threatens the health and livelihood of the occupationally exposed people. Occupationally exposed people. People working in the open areas, for example, the vendors, potentially causing a projected 4.5% loss of India's GDP. Very important data, right? If you have to write a data with respect to how the climate change is correlated to the economy aspect, and specifically to this vulnerable section, you can quote this particular data. Despite their considerable contribution, essential roles and sheer numbers, they are consistently excluded from the planning and implementation of the urban heat response strategies. So they should be primarily at the center stage, but we are not even giving importance to the kind of needs which they have, right? That is what the issue is. Key challenges in the current heat action plan. Many Indian cities have now heat action plan inspired by the pioneering efforts of Ahmedabad. These plans, guided by the National Disaster Management Authority, are meant to prepare the cities for increasing frequent and intense heat waves. The frequency and intensity of the heat waves is increasing. So therefore, subsequently, we need more of these heat plans, what the authors are saying. Yet, more than a decade later, most of these heat action plans remain perfunctory, just on paper, right? This is not practically implemented, not implemented in a proper way, underfunded and poorly coordinated. A review of the heat action plans across India reveals a consistent worrying pattern. What are the different issues with these heat action plans? Informal workers are largely invisible. So they are not being talked about in these heat action plan. Primarily, you should focus upon them because they are in the open environment. They're exposed, right? Occupationally exposed environment. Worse, most treat heat waves as temporary, short-term disasters instead of symptoms of a deeper climate crisis that demands long-term structural response. The NDMA's 2019 heat wave guidelines do not mention the informal workers explicitly. So there's no explicit mention of these workers, but generally under the category of outdoor workers and vulnerable groups. So you need to basically explicitly mention them. So this is the target population. This is the population where we need to make sure that we give them adequate provisions of services. At the state level, most of these heat action plan lack the protocols for the occupational safety, hydration, cooling spaces, shade provisions. See, these are the areas which a robust heat action plan should focus upon. We need to have proper amenities for the hydration. The water facilities, the drinking facilities should be there at different distances. There have to be the provisions with respect to the shade, right? Trees, adequate tree cover should be there. So these are the aspects which basically are not mentioned in these heat action plan. Even a mention of the compensation for lost work. City level plans take a generalized public health and awareness approach, neglecting the livelihood impacts. These heat action plans also suffer from fragmented governance and institutional silos. That is, we have different departments looking at the picture in differentiated compartments. There is no integrated manner in which these issues have to be looked upon, right? The ministries of Labour, Environment, Urban Affairs and Health are independently in the absence of the guidelines at the central level, resulting in disjointed and inconsistent protections for the workers. So they are having their own policies. Every ministry is having their own policies. There is no aspect of integration which the authors are talking about. Moreover, the city heat action plans remain short-term, immediate for the summer's months, crisis-oriented documents. So we are having a myopic vision, a short-sighted vision, which the authors are saying. City actions rarely integrate the long-term strategies such as urban cooling, heat-resilient infrastructure, working conditions, flexible work norms. There have to be these arrangements where the employers should incorporate the flexible work norms. You cannot force the employer, especially these, the contractors, the construction contractors. They make these people work in that particular situation of heat. So definitely it affects their health. Globally, cities are adopting worker protections. In the US, California and Oregon mandate employers to provide water. So the employers are mandated to provide these things to the employees, right? Water, shade, rest breaks, and heat safety training. France Plan Canicule requires work adjustment, hydration during the heat alerts, and opened public buildings and spaces to the public for cooling off. So the public buildings are made. They're made open so that people can go and rest there, sit there, right? So that they can have that cool environment. In Qatar and Australia, outdoor work is restricted during the peak heat, and employers are obligated to assess and mitigate the heat risks. In India too offers different examples. For example, the Ahmedabad's Heat Action Plan introduced the adjusted working hours and shaded rest areas. They should be there. Odisha mandates a halt to outdoor work during the peak hours. These good practices and innovations do offer the replicable worker-centric models. So the worker has to be made the center stage, what the authors are saying. New kind of urban heat towards a worker-centric response. So new kind of urban heat response, one that is worker-centered, just and grounded in the lived realities. First, the NDMA's 2019 heat guidelines must be updated to explicitly include the informal workers. A revised framework must map the occupational vulnerabilities distinctly for the varied workers, whether it's for the construction workers or the street vendors or the waste pickers, gig workers or the rickshaw pullers. We already know that these, delivery partners, what we call as for Zomato or Swiggy, they also bear the brunt of these, ill effects of climate change, the intense rainfalls or the intense heats, right? And provide the actionable protocol for city and state governments. This includes defining the safe working hours, mandatory rest breaks, access to the water, and emergency response mechanism, right? So again, a very simplified article, but gives you very good information. Second, the mandate for the worker participation in the creation of city and the state heat action plan. There have to be proper incorporation. There have to be the stakeholder. When we talk about the stakeholder approach, the workers must be consulted. That is a very important thing which has to be done. These cannot remain a top-down exercise. Bureaucrats sitting in a room, AC room, and then making policies. It should not be there. There has to be a proper participation of the section for which you are trying to bring the policy. These cannot remain a top-down exercise. Every municipal body must engage the workers' collective unions and workers' welfare boards in co-creating the occupation-specific plans. So this worker welfare boards, it also has been specified in the Code on Social Security. Very important. Different states are coming up with these worker welfare boards. Constituting civil society and community coordination groups at the city level is key. Local wisdom and the involvement of workers' association in co-producing solutions makes policies more realistic, responsive, and respected. So there has to be adequate participation of different stakeholders. It should not be a top-down strategy, what the authors are saying. Third, informal workers deserve the right to shade, rest, and cooling. Establish the shaded rest zones, hydration points, and community cooling centers. There has to be adequate provision of water at different places. There has to be the provision of shaded areas in the form of maybe the tree lines, right? So that is very important. In different areas, for example, markets, transport hubs, public spaces, labor chalks, right? You must have seen every city has a labor chalk, but over there the environment is very, it's very tough. So we need to come up with different policy initiatives. Maybe there can be a shade installation which can be there. Maybe there can be the adequate provision of water for these laborers, right? Open public buildings and malls and open spaces as cooling centers. And all these must be accessible, gender sensitive, and co-maintained by the workers and the local community. Again, the participation of this particular section is being emphasized. It is time to develop the norms, guidelines, institutionalize protections, and allocate dedicated budgets. Fourth, innovative financing through the corporate social responsibility, CSR, very important, right? So again, what we have to focus is upon this aspect, that these CSR contributions are diverted to making these provisions for these workers who are exposed in the open, right? The shade provisions or the hydration or the water facilities must support the local solutions as adaptations. Health insurance must be expanded to cover the heat-related illnesses, especially for those in the informal occupations who are typically excluded from the mainstream schemes. And yes, community neighborhood contribution and involvement are a must. Cool roofs, shaded walkways, passive ventilation must be the standard practice. Use these keywords: passive ventilation, cool roofs, right? As a part of the design and governance, Embedding the heat resilience and worker safety into how we design and govern our cities, heat adaptation and worker inclusion must be legally written. See, the overall objective of this particular article is that first you make the worker as the center stage, then include these workers as proper stakeholders. It should not be a top driven exercise, and there has to be a legal setup. There has to be a law which mandates these requirements, right? Master plans, building bylaws, and infrastructure codes. Cities must promote the natural shade through the urban forest and tree corridors, while also planning the blue networks. Very important. We need to have these water bodies, right? Water bodies such as public resting spaces. Informal, for example, you can have the lakes, artificial lakes. Informal workspaces such as the vendor markets, waste depots, and labor chalks must be retrofitted. Retrofitting is very important. Mostly used in when we talk about the disaster with respect to the earthquakes, right? So the retrofitting aspect, the structures already made, you need to retrofit in order to make them in line with the demands of the environment, with the materials and design strategies that ensure the thermal comfort. Now, again, next aspect which the authors are saying is, at the national level, an interministerial task force on the climate change and work, bringing together different ministries. They should not work in silos. They should have an integrated approach. Ministry of Labour, Employment, Housing and Urban Affairs, Environment, Forest and Climate Change and Health, and with, of course, the NDMA and state disaster management authorities. This task force should develop an integrated roadmap linking the climate resilience with worker protection and labor codes. So all the things have to be in holistic nature. Whenever you're coming up with the labor codes, whenever the states are trying to implement these labor codes, they need to have these provisions, very explicit provisions, which talk about the inclusion of this particular section as the most important component, because primarily it is for this section of the society. This, the exposed section, what we have is these laborers or the construction workers or the vendors. So they should be properly integrated. Every city and district must appoint a dedicated heat officer, someone empowered to manage and monitor the heat response measures. For informal workers, the climate crisis is not just a distant threat. It is present and daily struggle. The cost of inaction is no longer measured only in degrees. It is measured in lives, in lost livelihood and poor health and in burdened future. So again, very important point. Try to link the climate change with that of the social aspect of these vulnerable sections, the laborers, the construction workers, the vendors, and how to basically have a more robust structure. Now, as I told you, this is what we have, the urban heat island effect. In the urban areas, the average temperatures are much more as compared to the surrounding areas, the rural habitation or the open areas. So you can just have a look. So we have different reasons. For example, we have, let's say, the rural farmland, the suburban, the park, the urban residential area. So what you will observe is that the temperature keeps on increasing. The average temperature in the urban areas is quite more. Reasons: dark roads and asphalt in parking lots, they basically absorb the heat, right? Emission is not there. Dark rooftops retain heat. Lack of trees means less shade and less evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is something which really helps to cool down the overall environment. But because of lack of trees, we don't have that. Heat trapped by the buildings keeps urban cores warmer. So we are using these dark colored, grey infrastructure, black infrastructure, which is absorbing more of heat. And the heat is not able to dissipate. There are narrow passages. So the air is unable to basically have proper ventilation. There's no proper ventilation of the air. So ultimately, the overall environment warms up. Waste heat from factories, buildings and vehicles. You must have seen the exhaust in the air coming out from the exhaust of these air conditioners. Definitely increases the overall temperatures of the environment. Impermeable surfaces. Whenever you have these hard concrete surfaces, water absorption doesn't take place. And we don't have sufficient percolation which takes place. Also, we do not have these plants which can absorb these heat. So ultimately, the overall temperature increases. This is what the urban heat island. Also, we have the declaration of the heat wave by the NDMA. So the Indian Meteorological Department has given following criteria for heat waves. Can be important for the prelims. Heat wave need not to be considered till maximum temperature of a station reaches at least 40 degrees Celsius for plains and at least 30 degrees Celsius for hilly areas. When the normal maximum temperature of a station is less than or equal to the 40 degrees Celsius, heat wave departure from the normal is 5 degrees to 6 degrees. Severe heat wave departure from normal is 7 degrees or more. When the normal maximum temperature of a station is more than 40 degrees Celsius, heat wave departure from the normal is 4 degrees to 5 degrees Celsius. Severe heat wave departure from normal is 6 degrees or more. When the actual maximum temperature remains 45 degrees Celsius or more, irrespective of the normal maximum temperature, heat waves should be declared. So this is what the parameters which are to be followed given by the Indian Meteorological Department. Heat impacts of these heat waves. First, heat cramps in the form of edema, the swelling, what we call, and syncope, fainting, right? Then heat exhaustion, fatigue, weakness, dizziness, headache, nausea. Obviously, it compromises the overall productivity of the individual. Heat stroke, body temperatures of 40 degrees Celsius, that is 104 degree Fahrenheit or more, along with delirium, seizures, or coma. This is a potential fatal condition. So these are the aspects given by the NDMA and the Meteorological Department. So you can have a look, and definitely possibly a question can be framed in the prelims. Let's go to the next. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the IMF bailout package given to Pakistan. Now, in this particular article, there are two aspects which you must emphasize. The very first thing is that this is not the first time Pakistan has been given a package by the IMF. It has been given a package many a times before. Therefore, this time, India has registered a strong disapproval. It has abstained from the voting. It has said that the IMF is giving package to a state which is sponsoring terrorism, which encourages terrorism, and then causes a chaos. The second aspect, which is very important, which is not there in this article, is that through this, you see the double face of these Western countries and institutions. At one point of time, what they say is that we need to curb this terrorism. But again, they are giving a package to a country which has almost forever, since the time of its inception, has sponsored terrorism and ultimately become a failed state, right? So this topic becomes important. We'll talk about these two facilities which this article talks about. Possibly a question can come in the prelims. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, cleared a $1 billion tranche for Pakistan as a part of its $7 billion extended fund facility lending program and $1.3 billion tranche for resilience and sustainability facility. We'll talk about these two funds. India abstained from voting in the meeting, and it raised concerns over the efficacy of the IMF programs for Pakistan given its poor track record. As I told you, that many a times these packages have been given, but where the money went and where the money was used, because India is saying that this money which now the IMF is going to give, this would be used for enhancing the terror aspects, enhancing or increasing the terror infrastructure, training these people, brainwashing them, right, and then radicalizing them and ultimately causing the chaos in the neighboring country. Given its poor track record and also the possibility of misuse of the debt financing funds for state-sponsored cross-border terrorism, India conveyed its strong dissent at the IMF, reviewed the EFF lending program, and also considered a fresh resilience and sustainability facility lending program, $1.3 billion for Pakistan. The concern that fungible inflows, this cash inflows from the international financial institutions like the IMF, could be misused for military and state-sponsored cross-border terrorist purposes resonated with several member countries. See, you need to ask this question, that these Western countries, they say that we want to curb terrorism. Now, why you are giving money to Pakistan? You know that it is it's a birthplace of terrorism. You have most of the terrorists around the world. They even did not accept that Osama bin Laden was with them, right? So, US had to come and then, fire on their head. So that is what you have to understand, that they have a double-sided face. At one point of time, they say that, we need to curb terrorism. So what is the need of giving money to a state which would definitely use this particular whole of this money to sponsor, to increase the terror infrastructure? IMF rules do not permit a formal no vote, with the IMF typically resorting to the consensus for decision. Each country of the 25-member IMF board has a vote, but is linked to the country's economic size, what we call as a quota system. So ultimately, upon the basis of its GDP and different quotas it has, different countries have the voting patterns. India opposed the frequent bailouts to Pakistan in the IMF board meeting, pointing out that such a track record calls for into question that either the effectiveness of the IMF program designs for the Pakistan or the monitoring or their implementation by the Pakistan, right? So this has to be asked. Pakistan has received disbursement from the IMF. This is very important information. 28 years out of the 35 years since 1989. Had the previous program succeeded in putting in place a sound macroeconomic policy environment, Pakistan would not have approached the fund for another bailout program. So this is what India has said. Now again, when we talk about the IMF, possibly a question can, what you have to understand is that it's a particular Bretton Woods institution. Primarily, it helps the country when there's a sort of a balance of payment crisis, right? So in those situations, it gives the money or help to them. But many times, this money which is given, it is based on certain conditions, right? For example, open the market, reduce the trade barriers, reduce the subsidies, different aspects. So this is what you have to understand. The IMF was conceived in July 1944 at the United Nations Bretton Woods Conference. The 44 countries in attendance sought to build a framework for the international economic cooperation and avoid repeating the competitive currency devaluations that contributed to the Great Depression of 1930s. So this is important. See, we have development banks which primarily give money for specific projects. IMF is not doing for that. IMF is giving a bailout package primarily in order to avert or to mitigate the crisis of the balance of payment with respect to the trade aspect. Unlike the development banks, the IMF does not lend for specific projects. Instead, the IMF provides financial support to countries hit by crisis to create breathing room as they implement policies that restore the economic stability and growth. It also provides the precautionary financing to help the prevent crisis. IMF lending is continuously refined to meet the country's changing needs. Again, what are the objectives of IMF? You have to understand. The IMF works to achieve sustainable growth and prosperity for all of its 191 member countries. It does so by supporting the economic policies that promote the financial stability and monetary cooperation, which are essential to increase the productivity, job creation, and economic well-being. The IMF has three critical missions: furthering the international monetary cooperation, encouraging the expansion of trade and economic growth, and the last, discouraging policies that would harm the prosperity. Again, I'm emphasizing these are the institutions which were created way back in 1940s and 50s, and they do not reflect the current geopolitical realities. It is for that reason that we came up with the organization BRICS, and it has its own institutions. Now, you need to tell me in the comment section, which are those two institutions, right? Which basically challenged the World Bank and which challenged the IMF. Whenever you have a country in the BRICS facing the balance of payment crisis, what is the arrangement which BRICS talk about? Do mention in the comment section. Who runs the IMF? The IMF is accountable to its member countries and the governments. At the top of the organizational structure is a board of governors, consisting of one governor and one alternate governor, primarily the finance minister or the Reserve Bank of India governor from Indian side, from each member country, usually the top officials from the central bank or the finance ministry. The board of governors meet once a year at the IMF World Bank annual meetings. Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, right? 25 of the governors serve on the International Monetary and Financial Committee, IMFC, which advises the IMF's executive board. So you have this supervisory body which gives the advisories to the board, and on that basis the board functions. The day-to-day work of the IMF is overseen by 25-member executive board, the same board which the article is talking about. 25-member executive board which represents the entire membership and is supported by the IMF staff. The managing director is the head of the IMF staff and the chair of the executive board, and is assisted by our deputy managing directors. Now, this can be possibly important in the form of the kind of reports which IMF is coming out. World Economic Outlook, Global Financial Stability Report, Fiscal Monitor. See, we all are aware of these two reports, but we are not aware. Mostly, we are not aware of this report, Fiscal Monitor, published by the IMF. World Bank publishes, when we're talking about the World Bank, there are different reports being published because possibly there can be a question, and that's the reason I've written this. World Bank publishes several important reports focusing on various aspects of global development. Key reports include World Development Report, Global Economic Prospects, Poverty and Shared Prosperity Series. Extended Fund Facility, what is that? This particular facility provides the financial assistance to countries facing serious medium-term balance of payment. See, Pakistan has always faced that. So it's not like a particular time when they're facing it. It has for, since the time it came into being, on that, negative day when it came into being, since that particular country has been facing these issues. Balance of payment problems because of structural weaknesses. See, if you'll spend your money in all these guns and terror activities, definitely you're bound to fail, right? And ultimately it's a failed state that require time to address. To help countries implement the medium-term structural reforms, the EFF offers longer programs engagement and a longer repayment period. So it's a particular facility which focuses upon the longer repayment period. The Resilience and Sustainability Facility provides affordable longer-term financing to support the low-income and vulnerable middle-income countries. So if Pakistan is really vulnerable country, how dare it's fighting with India? That's the question which you have to ask. Undertaking macro-critical reforms to reduce the risks into prospective balance of payments stability, including those related to climate change and pandemic preparedness. So these are the two funds through which the Pakistan has been given the money. This possibly can come that these two funds are related to which of the following organization. A question can come over there. So let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, here is a publication of a particular report which talks about the erosion of press freedom, especially in the South Asian countries. Quite static information, but quite relevant. So what it says is, Indian media has been shackled and subjected to a systemic strategy to cripple it. So we have the 23rd Annual South Asia Press Freedom Report of 24-25, the report titled Frontline Democracy, Media and Political Churn. Flags several concerning trends, including growing trust deficit in media outlets, choking of independent websites, and extreme precarity of gig workers with the challenges of artificial intelligence. See, again, what you have to understand, that there are multiple challenges with this, which this particular report is talking about. At one point of time, what it's saying is in the South Asia, and especially when we talk about the countries like Pakistan, there is absolute curbing of the information, right? And the journalists have been murdered. Then when it looks at India, it says, what this report says, that there have been many laws in the form of, or agencies, what you can say, in the form of CBI or Enforcement Directorate, which are curbing these entities, the press entities who are providing the information. And ultimately, they are suppressing these journalists. Next aspect which the report is talking about is that there has been a sudden rise in the artificial intelligence, and this is compromising the freelance journalists, because now every information is available through these artificial intelligence applications. That is what the report is talking about. The report reviews the state of press freedom in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan and Maldives, noting that Pakistan is, for all intents and purposes, an authoritarian regime operating under the guise of democracy. Absolutely true, right? Then it witnessed the most violent year for journalists in the country in the 2 decades. Then when it talks about the South Asia, most governments in South Asia have failed to reverse the ever-increasing levels of impunity for the crimes against journalists, right? In India, it says, it talks about the horrific murder of Mukesh Chandrakar in Bastar, right? Very brutally murdered. India, propaganda and press, the report flagged the proliferation of hate speech, disinformation. See, we have misinformation, right, which is wrong information. Then we have disinformation, that information which is deliberately intended to confuse the people, to create panic, which even the information ministry has highlighted through the PIB that right now Pakistan is engaging in that information warfare, just saying that we have captured so many Indian soldiers, we have killed so many planes. So all that is rubbish, with the IT cells of political parties playing a big role. Again, we have different political parties, and according to this particular report, the IT cells are very active, right? So they are also promoting this disinformation aspect according to the report. The legal environment for the press has become increasingly hostile. The use of defamation laws, sedition charges, UAPA, prevention of money laundering to curb media freedom. Journalists and media houses have faced the legal challenges for publishing reports critical of the government, which has led to self-censorship. They are in that fear mode, right? They don't have, according to the report, they do not have that much liberty to express themselves. Ongoing mauling, trampling, suppressing of the freedom of speech and expression is being done on the grounds of national security. These are reasons being provided. Maintaining public order or preventing misinformation. Global Risks Report. Now, again, you have to tell me, pause the video and tell me who publishes this particular report. Very important report, which has found manipulated and falsified information to be the most severe short-term risk. The report also dwells on the other challenges facing the media. Media workforce reeling under a shrunken job market, the growing use of AI for content creation, decline in the advertisement revenue, new labor codes encouraging the contract work, restructuring of corporate media houses and because of mergers and acquisitions, and the worsening precarity of freelance journalism. Right, so because of all these AI and other things, the freelance journalism is at stake. On the flip side, on the positive side, it has also talked about many of the important things. Media's digital transition has also presented new opportunities, especially for the growing alternative media as a counterbalance to the stagnating legacy media. Now, again, see, we have a very important report, which is the freedom of press worldwide. This is what you have to understand. Now, this is basically published by Reporters Without Borders. Do remember, Reporters Sans Frontiers, right? So this is very important. You can see that India has been placed in this category of very serious situation, right? And also the adjoining countries. Again, these are again those organizations which are Western dominated, and you can see most of these countries over here, they are in that good zone, right? So they say that we follow democratic principles, but you don't. But the reality is very different. Next aspect, again, in order to just make sure that you have a proper repository of the reports, possibly a question can come. World Economic Forum produces a series of annual reports. For example, the Global Competitiveness Report, Global Information Technology Report, Global Gender Gap Report, very important, Global Risk Report. So it is the World Economic Forum. Global Travel and Tourism Report, Financial Development Report, Global Enabling Trade Report. The International Debt Report is published by the World Bank. We also have the Global Financial Development Report published by the World Bank and Global Financial Stability Report published by the IMF. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this talks about the menace of pollution in the Himalayas. So we have a particular non-governmental organization which is Zero Waste Himalaya Alliance. What it is saying is that there has been an increase in the waste, primarily the single-use plastic, which has increased in the Himalayan region. So you must have seen tourists going over there using these plastic bottles, the plastic crockeries, and the other items such as the packages of the chips, right? And then they throw over there. This has severely affected the pristine nature, the sacred, the environment of the Himalayas. It is clogging the drains. It is affecting the water flows. It is affecting the overall ecosystem in the Himalayas. So this is what the authors are talking about. Single-use food and beverage packaging forms more than 84% of the plastic waste in the eco-sensitive Himalayan region. Zero Waste Himalayan Alliance, about 70% of the plastics collected from across the Himalayan belt from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh is non-recyclable. Can you imagine? More than 70% of the waste is non-recyclable. The alliance was initiated by the Zero Waste Himalaya, maybe a question in the prelims can come, an organization based in Sikkim's Gangtok, an integrated mountain initiative based in Uttarakhand, Dehradun. The Himalayan cleanup is one of the biggest movements against the plastic pollution in the Indian Himalayas since 2018. Past 6 years, our data has indicated that Himalayan waste crisis is fundamentally a production and systems issue rather than the post-consumer waste management. Now, what it means? We just think that the tourists are going there and throwing the waste, the plastics over there. But that is not the issue. It is primarily the whole system. That plastic, there's a supply chain which has emerged. Those items are basically going over there. There is a particular supply chain, there are producers, there are suppliers, and there are consumers. So we have to target the whole supply chain, not just focus upon cleaning the environment, whatever the waste is being accumulated. While the role of individual behavioral change was acknowledged and emphasized, the need for systemic, there has to be a whole of the process approach, policy level interventions, and a paradigm shift away from centralized extractive waste systems was seen as critical. So you need to come up with those policies which look at the overall process holistically, which make sure that these items should not be reaching over there. There have to be some alternatives which should be provided. 9 Himalayan states targeted in 2025. Sikkim generated the most trash items. Now here's a particular infographic which talks about the menace of single-use plastic. So India generates almost 15 million tons of plastic waste, and a significant component is of the single-use plastic. Again, it ranks 8th in the world, producing almost 5.5 million tons of single-use plastic. Now, per capita waste is very small, so therefore, in terms of the overall production, it is high, but the per capita is low, so it is placed at 94th globally, right? Then what are the effects? Plastic constitutes approximately 80% of the marine litter. Clogged urban drainage, very important, one of the causes for the urban floods in the cities. Open burning of plastics releases different toxins, different, those pollutants which are really very harmful. Challenges: approximately 85% of the plastic waste in India is mismanaged. Around 5.8 million tons of plastic waste are openly burned. Then 50% of the waste is handled by the informal sector. So there is no line of formal waste segregation and collection. That is very important. The current ban addresses just 11% of the single-use plastic. Then what should be the way forward? First, enhance the enforcement of the existing bans. Then invest in research and development of how to basically manage these single-use plastics, or come up with different alternatives of these single-use plastics. Many companies, e-commerce platforms have done so. For example, Myntra, right? So we can have the paper-based material, right? Integrate the informal waste workers in the formal economy through the training and support. So these are the measures which are needed. Let's go to the last topic of the day. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to the Central Consumer Protection Authority. Now, CCPA has given notice to different retailers who were basically selling the walkie-talkie. Now, why this is important is because the sale of walkie-talkie is prohibited, primarily because it is a national security issue. Because these walkie-talkies use these frequency, and there can be a sort of a resonance with the kind of frequency we have for some of the defense installations or some of the strategic installations. Therefore, this is prohibited. So CCPA has basically given a notice to different e-retailers and the e-commerce platforms also. So we'll look into what CCPA is all about. CCPA has issued notice to 13 e-commerce platforms players like Amazon, Flipkart for illegal sale of walkie-talkie devices on their platforms, which could raise security concerns. CCPA has issued 30 notices to leading digital marketplaces against the illegal listing and sale of walkie-talkies on e-commerce platforms. The crackdown focuses upon the sale of walkie-talkie without proper frequency disclosure. There has to be a frequency disclosure within what frequencies the walkie-talkie is working, but there is no disclosure. That is one of the issues. Licensing information or equipment type approval. It has to be approved, right? Constituting a violation of the Consumer Protection Act of 2019. The sale of non-compliant wireless devices not only breaches the statutory obligations, but also poses significant risks to the national security operations. This talks about the importance of CCPA. Let's see, because this can be really very important. First, that this is a statutory organization. That is, it is based upon the Consumer Protection Act of 2019, and which is a ministry. The ministry is Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution, Department of Consumer Affairs. Do remember, because there have been questions asking that this particular body falls under which ministry, right? So there can be, tell me under which ministry we have the NIA, and also tell me under which ministry we have the CBI. Do mention in the comment section. The CCPA has been established under the Consumer Protection Act 2019 and has come into force with effect from 24 July 2020 to regulate the matters relating to the violation of the rights of consumers, unfair trade practices, and false or misleading advertisement. Powers of CCPA. The very first is to protect, promote, and enforce the rights of the consumers. Then prevent unfair trade practices and ensure that no person engages himself in the unfair trade. Then ensure that no false or misleading advertisement is made of any good or services which contravenes the provisions of this act. You cannot fool the public. You have to just specify what that particular product contains. Ensure that no person takes part in the publication of any advertisement which is false or misleading. Very important authority, and again, it's a statutory body under the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution. That's it for today's discussion. I hope you really enjoyed the discussion. If you did so, do mention in the comment section and give us a like. That's it. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.